of the week. So hopefully everybody had a great Canada Day and had some time off this week as well. Um, First, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for today. We have Hallie Siegel from the Canadian Robotics Council. Hallie leads the national efforts to strengthen Canada's robotics ecosystem, where she fosters collaboration between the industry, academia, government, and society. She has a career spanning technology, innovation, communication. She's advised organizations and research institutes and companies on how to translate complex robotics and AI advances into meaningful stories. But really, Haley works to ensure Canada is not only a user of robotic technology, but also a global leader in our responsible development and deployment of robotics as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Haley. Um, I see something on your screen, but I don't know if you need to click it one more time to
Yeah,
share. Okay.
I will. I will. But I think when I do that, will you be able to see me anymore?
Yeah, we can still see you at the top.
Okay, cool. Can you see my presentation too?
Yes, you're all
Oh,
set.
wow. Okay, we're set. This is so exciting. Technology, you think when you're in it, you think it should work all the time, but it doesn't always. And that's why you guys are such rock stars, really, because nobody really understands how tough it is to put it in the field until they're actually putting it in the field. And I think the farming community above many other application areas in robotics has quite unique challenges, but this community really is one of the rock stars of robotics and implementation, tackling some of the toughest application areas. So I'm quite excited to meet all of you and have a chance to hear a bit about your experiences too. Um, Ashley, do we just jump right in, or what's the format here?
No, that's perfect. We usually introduce any new members. We've already done that. So the next half hour is for you for your presentation. And then after that, we'll jump into any questions as well. I'll monitor the chat in case anything pops up while you're presenting as well.
Okay, cool.
So I'll
Well,
hand it over to you.
yeah, amazing. Okay, well, thank you guys so much for the incredible opportunity today. Ashley, in particular, for organizing as a community organizer. I know that wrangling roboticists is a fun job. Actually, I love it, and everybody has such unique challenges. Actually, that organizing all that uniqueness into a cohesive story or a group is a big challenge. So kudos to you guys for getting yourselves together. So I am CEO of the Canadian Robotics Council. We're a national nonprofit that brings together the leading actors across the robotics ecosystem. That includes the robotics developers. It includes the research and training centers. It includes the policymakers, and it includes the investors in the space. So we're primarily on the developer side, but we also include those on the application area side of it, which is why it's exciting and great to be talking to you guys today. So I'm going to focus my time today. I'm not an agricultural roboticist, and so that area of expertise is yours, but I do want to provide some bigger context about what's happening more generally in the robotics world in Canada and globally to some degree, just to help you understand that a lot of the challenges that you're facing are not unique to agricultural applications, and that's what actually drives the council to come together, because we know that roboticists across Canada are facing many similar challenges, and some of those challenges are policy oriented, and together we believe we can help ensure that policymakers understand those challenges and can unblock them across the ecosystem. So my focus today is to I'm going to look at what I'll call like an emerging industrial strategy for Canada. Industrial strategy actually fell out of fashion for a good long time, and it was sort of funny enough, almost a toxic thing to talk about for many, many years. But I think we've seen in the current administration, and also because of global developments, there's an increasing interest in industrial strategy. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what are some of the core components that are pulling together Canada's industrial strategy and how that impacts the robotics sector in general, and AgRobotics in particular. So I'm going to look at three pieces today. One is the national AI strategy. One is Canada's defense industrial strategy. And of course, there's a new national food security strategy that just came out earlier this or last month. And maybe you've already had a chance to look at it. But let's look at how some of these intersect and what they might mean for you. So, one of the things that the council believes in, stands for, is that we have all these deep tech technologies in Canada, and that we have these big national strategies around clean tech, AI, quantum, but robotics is like an strangely missing layer in our deep tech priority stack. So I'm going to look at that. And you might say, well, hold on a second, Hallie. Don't we have a robotic strategy? I mean, we have the Canada Space Arm, and we're putting billions of dollars we've invested in billions of dollars over the years. We've renewed the Canadarm strategy. Then things in space changed, and now that project has shifted. The space arm isn't actually something that NASA wants anymore. They've changed their plans. They're focused on the moon. So, but don't we have a strategy in space robotics? Doesn't that mean we have a robotics strategy? But the reality is we don't actually have one. So if you look at our federal policy instruments, like what has been formally designated as a national technology priority, we do have, through contractual agreement with MDA, a space robotic strategy. We have a new AI strategy that we'll look at. There is a quantum strategy. There is a clean tech strategy, but robotics is an implicit strategy. It's kind of buried underneath all the other programs that we have, and it's not really named out as a top tier level. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that might be a problem. But before I do, I want to go back and actually acknowledge that, in fact, robotics was always part of Canada's AI strategy going way, way back. You've probably heard of Geoffrey Hinton. He was Nobel Prize laureate. That was awarded to him in 2024. But that early work was started by the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research back in the 80s. And they launched this first deep tech R&D program for Canada, was called Artificial Intelligence, Robotics, and Society. And so robotics was actually always there at the from the inception of our AI strategy. And that makes sense because robots uh, need brains in order to work. And actually, if you look at the global history of AI, a lot of the problems that people got into AI to solve were actually to try and control robots. So these fields actually have historically grown up together. Um, but if you want to go back into the history of robotics in Canada, you actually have to zoom back into the 60s. And there was this fellow called John Chapman, who was a policymaker at the federal level. And he had this idea that there was this big challenge that Canada had. You know, we were this huge country surrounded by water on three sides, many different parts of the economy, like many different types of the economy from coast to coast, all of these different regions with different kinds of challenges, mountains, oceans, plains. And to knit the country together back before the age of the internet and cell phones and all of that, there was hard work to do. You had to literally put in rail, and then the phone lines followed. And building that infrastructure from coast to coast was a huge challenge. And there was actually a point in time when, if you were in Montreal and you wanted to call Vancouver, your phone routed down through the US and then came back up, and you were charged long distance for a domestic call, to paying US carriers to do that. And this was seen as a really big challenge, because how do you organize a country when your communication systems are literally dependent on another country? And so, but there was, how would you build this at scale was the big question. And because with a small population and low tax base, it was just a ginormous um, area to try to build hard infrastructure across. And so John Chapman had this idea, this crazy idea, that Canada could build a satellite network. This hadn't been done before, that would serve as, in space, a telecommunications network that would knit the country together. And he really saw this as like almost as um, like a social justice issue because it was critically important to bring the country together. And in fact, Canada was the first country in the world to put a non-military communications satellite system in orbit. The problem was, how do we actually get that satellite into space? And one of the challenges, because we couldn't afford our own space program, so that was another kind of problem. And so what they proposed was they proposed to NASA that Canada would leverage its expertise in nuclear robotics, and it would hitch a ride on to space. Uh, by participating in the International Space Program. And so actually it was the Canadarm is what got us into space, and that was behind that entire program. So what's interesting is that quest to reach outer space is what inspired really an entire generation of robotics innovators. And some of the technologies that were developed for the Canadarm actually wound up in other application areas, including surgical robotics. Synaptive was one of the spinouts that came out of that early technology. It's a very well-known Canadian medical robotics company. And Canadians became known all over the world for being able to develop safe, reliable, high precision, dexterous robots that could operate in remote and extremely challenging environments. And so we developed that deep expertise, and that's embedded in our university and research system and has been for decades. Now, that quest into outer space gave us a totally new perspective on our planet. But today's challenges are a lot more down to earth, and there's climate change, and there's wildfire, and there's flood, and we have all kinds of challenges that we're facing today, and that's what politicians are now paying attention to. Less so the quest, well, some to some degree the quest for space, but a lot more of those challenges are on the ground. Now, Canadian robotics has emerged across many different sectors, not just space applications and not just medical, but actually we have robotics companies that serve many, many of Canadians' critical sectors. And we have specialized robotics faculty. We're pumping out lots of technology graduates. There's 168 government units across the federal government that touch on robotics in some capacity. That's wild to think about. And there's well over 300 companies in the space. So at this point, Canada, actually, one of the things we're great at is service robotics. We're number 5 in the world in terms of developing robotics companies, which is quite amazing given our small population size. And that's why policymakers sometimes say Canada punches above its weight in robotics globally. And our most of our companies were globally competitive in multiple markets. And what's really important is most of those companies actually have to export in order to survive. So, here we are. We've got this ecosystem where we've got all these foundational technologies, and we're addressing critical sectors. But the challenge is that when you only have a space robotics strategy, it's like you've got this gap that prevents that technology from reaching the areas where it can actually be put to use. And so that's one of our issues. And that's one of the reasons why Canada's relatively low in adoption in robotics technologies relative to peer nations. So this is data from the International Federation of Robotics. They look at robot density, which is the number of robots in the manufacturing sector. And I know that's not agriculture, but this is sort of one of the standard metrics that the federal government and countries all over the world use to measure rates of robot adoption. Um, this slide shows you actually the growth in robot density, and that's important too, because we can see, leaders, who's really leading the pace, and it shouldn't surprise you to see Korea and China up there, but India also is a big is rapidly adopting. We've heard, why does it matter? Well, we've heard that there's a productivity crisis. our productivity has been declining relative to our peer nations and compared to the US. And of course, robots are designed specifically to help with productivity issues. In fact, robot adopters in Canada, and this is important, we have to look at Canadian data and not just international numbers. Canadian robot adopters actually contribute an outsized share of jobs, national revenue, and innovation. So 2% of Canadian business population is a robot adopter. They contribute to 8% of employment and almost 12% of the national revenue. And they're almost twice as likely to innovate a new product or a new business service as non-adopting companies. And what we tend to see, this is StatsCan data, an almost 20% increase in employment after firms adopt robots. And that's because those that adopt become more productive and they're able to grow. So Canadian robotics firms are a lot more likely to export than the Canadian average. And they're almost 60% of all Canadian firms actually have to export in order to survive because our domestic adoption is so low, there isn't much of a market here for them. And so there's an upside to that export. One is that it means our robotics firms are internationally competitive and they're embedded in the global supply chain. I mean, these folks know how to do international trade. On the downside, it means that every time they sell a robot to a competitor, they're we're exporting that productivity ability to a competing nation or to a company in a competing nation. And that makes it harder for our domestic industries to catch up, and it effectively widens the standard of living and productivity gap between Canada and our trading partners. So that's frustrating to roboticists and to many others. So this slide shows robot adoption across Canadian sectors. Robots, were designed initially for the manufacturing sector, so it should be no surprise that that's the leading area. And you can see agriculture there it is at about 3%. One of the things in Canada is that it's actually very heavily driven by auto manufacturing. We're quite advanced in auto adoption, but that means that our other sectors are under adopted, and so that's a challenge. Um, Another thing that we can look at is plans to adopt AI hardware. Well, it's not exactly robots, but StatsCan does track that, and AI hardware could include robots. And one of the things that's interesting is in the agri-food space, actually, we see it's the intention to adopt that is quite high relative to some of the other industries that might surprise you. Similar to transportation and warehousing, which is a huge area for robotics application. Um, Globally, this is IFR data. Agriculture accounts for is in the top, I think it's fourth in terms of top application area for service robotics. So that should give you a sense of what's happening on the global stage. Okay, so why do Canadian farms have to automate? You guys are going to be way bigger experts in this than I am, and we can talk about that after. But what's driving automation in Canada and why it's particular in Canada compared to other countries. We've got the number of acres per farm is huge in Canada relative to peer nations, and same with the number of acres per operator. So Canadian farm operators actually have to cover more than farms in other world areas on a per acre basis. Similar with greenhouse per square foot, and of course the crunch comes on the average growing days per year because that's also lower than other countries. And with a huge proportion of the number of farm operators set to retire in the next little while, that's going to increase all the challenges in this area. And so what I want to point out is that, the market here is dealing with scale issues, it's dealing with labor issues, it's dealing with throughput issues, it's dealing with time constraints, and these are all drivers for robotics adoption. And I know you will deal with all kinds of issues like temporary foreign workers, and you'll be covering, you have way more information about that than I do, but these are sort of the larger trends that I'm seeing. One of the things that you'll want to note is that, if you look at and this is StatsCan data, they've begun studying barriers to robot adoption. We're quite glad to see that. Um, that a lot of the issues that will be faced in the agricultural robotics sector are the same as the ones that are faced across the board, whether it's mining, construction, manufacturing, et cetera. It's access to talent. I'm not sure about the ROI, or the returns are going to take too long. And its access to capital are going to be the top ones. And then, of course, in the agricultural space, there's going to be some unique issues that will exacerbate that. And you'll have a lot more detail about this than I do, but some of the things that come to mind are the challenges around access to capital, in particular for small family businesses. Dealing with legacy equipment and the complex need for interoperability across many different types of farm equipment. There's In rural areas, there tends to not be good connectivity, and so that can be a challenge if you're trying to coordinate fleets. Um, of course, you're dealing with highly variable real world field conditions. It's not outer space, but farms are operating in tough environments. Dealing with in-field integration and in-field um, repair and maintenance is definitely a much bigger challenge than doing it in a warehouse. And of course, farms may not be close to technology centers where you have high concentrations of experts in, say, robotics or AI or technology deployment. And so all of those things will exacerbate the key reported barriers in your sector. And I'm sure you have many more. I want to quickly unpack the Canadian food security strategy. This just came out. Some of the things that I think were worth mentioning, the key targets, this concept of farm to table self-sufficiency across the entire food supply chain. One of the things that's interesting about that from a robotics perspective is that robotics applies not just to farming, but also to food processing, logistics and transportation, wholesale trade in terms of moving goods and services in a warehouse. Robotics really applies across the entire food supply chain. Um, Another key target was this 10% increase in consumption of domestically processed food. So that's a huge increase. They're targeting a huge increases in GDP growth, increased in SME produced local food sales, and a reduction in greenhouse labor. These are all set targets that will not be possible to achieve without automating. I mean, I just don't see how that's going to happen, especially with all the looming retirements coming forward. If you look at their implementation plan, there's quite a number of funds designed to essentially do reshoring around value add food processing, to support year-round growing through fund specifically for greenhouses, and to expand independent food terminals and hubs. So that's what the funding envelope looks like. What's missing in the strategy for agricultural robotics specifically? One of the things that's interesting is that the strategy really champions domestic procurement of food, but it doesn't actually seem to provide incentives for procuring domestic equipment to enable that production of food. So that's an interesting challenge. I didn't see any direct programs to support on-farm technology integration and equipment and maintenance. From a talent and training perspective, the strategy strangely mentions Budget 2026's promise to create 100,000 Red Seal workers, so carpenters, electricians, welding. This is great, but it doesn't really address the specialized skills that are needed at the interface of ag, AI, and robotics. And there wasn't any mention that I could see around connectivity, data infrastructure, data standards, interoperability. So those are some of the things that haven't yet been addressed in the food strategy that may need some attention. I'm going to talk briefly about some of the other policy instruments that are coming out just to give you a sense of how they might intersect with agrobotics. So we saw last fall and into the winter, and we waited a long time for the results. But Canada had an AI consultation sprint. It was the largest public consultation in our government's history on technology, and it got over 64,000 responses from over 10,000 participants. So it was a huge, huge study, and they used AI to extract a bunch of data from that. Um, Not too surprising, but the goal of that was to accelerate AI adoption across the economy. And they want to be able to scale Canadian champions, strengthen sovereignty, and very important, build public trust, skills, and safety. Now, if you looked at the summary of inputs, there was a lot of focus on AI ethics, AI safety, and responsible use of AI. But we saw almost no mention at all in the AI strategy. Completely absent was robotics, manufacturing, physical AI, the hard sectors, except for in the one section of the report that talked about who responded to the survey. So this was sort of interesting because it was primarily respondents if they said what sector they belonged to. Most of the respondents were from the IT sector, finance, arts and culture, but very, very few and low responses from the hard sectors that drive the economy. And that shouldn't really be too surprising because if you look at the reasons why Canadian businesses don't plan to use AI, is because they say AI isn't relevant to my business. And 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 I think this is the part of the gap is why an AI strategy, a lot of politicians, policymakers have thought, okay, AI, robotics can be part of an AI strategy, but robotics is fundamentally different from AI. It might use AI, but AI doesn't have to touch and interact with the world. And robots do, and that takes more money, it takes more time to deploy. And so we need separate kinds of incentives to encourage adoption in robotics than we do for AI. So it doesn't make sense to bury AI under or robotics under an AI strategy. Now, one of the key things with the AI consultation that was so important, actually, and it makes sense that it was a public consultation, is because the federal government was highly aware of how concerned Canadians are about AI. They're worried about losing their job to automation. They're concerned about lack of training at work. And compared to the global average, Canadians are less likely to trust AI than their global peers. Okay, so this is a really big issue. If you're going to invest billions of dollars into an AI strategy, you don't want your population being against that. It's just not a great, not a great approach. So that consultation was a really important activity of the federal government. One of the things that's interesting is that if you compare the concerns raised by everyday Canadians in the AI consultation sprint to the actual reported barriers to adoption from industry people, the Canadian public has almost exactly the opposite concerns that industry does. So, where industry is worried about access to talent and ROI and access to capital, the Canadian public is overwhelmingly concerned with security, privacy, and regulation. Um, what's a little ironic is if you look at why companies tend to adopt technology, one of the top cited reason for adopting tech for competitive technology is actually to support compliance with regulation. So this really shows that the Canadian public really doesn't understand technology and its implementation, and we shouldn't necessarily expect them to. But these were the things that the federal government needed to juggle as it was going through its AI strategy development. Now, the AI strategy did come out. One of the things, despite the consultation, the public consultation, there was also a number of industry tables and reports that went in. The Canadian Robotics Council also submitted a consultation, series of recommendations to the federal government as part of that. And one of the things that we're very pleased to see was a significant pivot towards the adoption versus early stage R&D of AI. So if we go back to Jeff Hinton, Jeff, and all of that, that was that early stage development of AI. It was very much university-led work, and now there's a much bigger focus towards adoption. They named five priority sectors. Robotics has now been named a priority sector. It's lumped under advanced manufacturing, which we think is a little unfortunate because robotics applies across way more fields, as you well know, than just robotics or just manufacturing. But they also name agriculture as one of the priority sectors for AI, so that should make you happy. It mentions AI training for the skilled trades, which was something that we also asked for. Um, Unfortunately, it stops short of offering capital support for equipment and machinery outside of data and compute infrastructure. So there's tons of support for that, but we're still not seeing the same kind of level of support for physical AI in business in the form of equipment and machinery, aka robots, which would help you guys a lot. I'm going to briefly touch on the Canadian industrial strategy. This is another policy instrument where we're seeing um, robotics emerging. Officially, uncrewed systems and their manufacture has been labeled a tier one sovereign capability. So that's really important. This brings in a lot of people think about robot arms, but uncrewed systems are mobile robots. And that's what brings the robotic community together is the automation at the intersection of mobility and dexterity or manipulation. Um, We're seeing focus for SMEs on dual use alignment, but one of the things that the strategy does fall short on is classifying Canada's broader commercial sector as a sovereign capability. That's happening right now in the US. And with the very large tax dollars that are going to be spent on defense, these are public dollars that would be spent on defense. I think it makes sense that we view our economy as a strategic defense like area for strategic defensive investment, and so developing mechanisms that help to ensure that defense spending actually benefits the broader areas of economy is how we have a resilient and secure country. So globally, very briefly, we're seeing the U.S. is introduced legislation to establish a national robotics strategy. They're very concerned about China's advances in this area. The Chinese government is standing up a target to procure 10,000 humanoid robots within commercial applications by the end of 2026. So huge. This is just the latest in decades worth of targeted spending for automation and robotics in China. Korea just announced that it plans to spend 1 trillion on memory chip production in humanoid robotics. The government in the UK is planning robotics as a priority sector and has been announcing dedicated budget for robotics adoption centers. Uh, Australia has a new robotic strategy. So many of our trading partners and global peers have robotic strategies already. Um, really briefly, an AI strategy, a quantum strategy, a strategy without robotics is not nearly as strong as those strategies with robotics. Robotics is complementary to almost all of our other deep tech strategies, and it's also complementary to many of the other applied strategies that Canada already has in place. From a food security perspective, a food strategy without robotics, I don't see how we're going to meet those targets. It will likely mean in an ongoing reliance on imports and rising food costs without automation. With robotics, way more likely to reach those targets for year-round self-sufficiency and scale. And this is writ large across all the other application areas as well. So the Canadian Robotics Council's mandate is twofold. There's an interior to the country. It's really about driving adoption across our economy to help Canadian sectors be globally competitive. And it's also about helping Canadian robotics innovators reach those global markets and influence them and scale um, and bring the best and brightest of what we have to solve global challenges. We believe a national robotics strategy that integrates physical AI across the economy is what's missing and what's needed to essentially fill the gap in this matrix that we have of deep tech and applied area strategies. And we think it's within reach. There's a lot of the pieces are coming together, but what's missing is we haven't named robotics a priority yet. So we're working to raise awareness for that in the ecosystem. We are a proud member of the International Federation of Robotics. We represent Canada to the international community officially. I mentioned that we bring together the researchers, the companies, and the policymakers. We also recently stood up a capital committee, which brings together the main funders in the space as well. So we've got four legs of a table to hold the community up. And with a bit of help from funding from NGen, we uh, earlier this year launched a Canadian robotics case study library. So if you have examples of in-field deployments that are showing an actual return, and the focus is return on investment, because we know farmers are very, very picky of all the customers. Farmers are pinched almost more than anybody. If you can't show the ROI, they're not going to purchase. So our library is focused specifically on demonstrating real world return on investment. If you have examples, we would love to feature them in our library. If you have examples but haven't documented them yet, we have a prototyped of a toolkit to help people fast track that and make it easier. We have examples and templates that we are happy to share with you, and would welcome your contributions to that. Coming up in September this year in Toronto, we will be having our annual symposium. It's the same week as an International Robotics Developers Conference that we also brought to Canada. So we're quite excited about that. We would love to see you there. The format, we have some panels, but a lot of it is actually about finding partners. There's plenty of room for networking at the event, and we would love to welcome anybody from this group out. So just to recap, we're a nonprofit. Robotics is relevant from coast to coast. We got the full ecosystem behind us. And thanks very much for your time.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll open it up if you want to close your screen there, and we'll open it up to questions. Dan, I see you have your hand up first if you want to uh, pop in.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much. That was really, really informative, and it was great to hear your perspective. Great talk, really.
Thank you.
And yeah, you mentioned kind of at the end there that, the ROI is kind of the biggest pinch for agriculture. And I think, just comparing agriculture to automotive, for example, the product that we're working with is much lower value. And the labor that robotics would be replacing is also, sort of lowest tier. So this is probably, the reason for some of the biggest challenges in ag robotics. And I wonder from your perspective, what you see as coming down the pike for kind of helping to mitigate that difference. I mean, so looking at a lot of the new developments in robotic technology, the push I think is in being able to do new things, do things that robots are currently not capable of doing. And I don't think that in ag robotics we necessarily need such a push for absolutely new things, but can we do the basic things cheaper, faster, more robustly?
Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. And this is one of the biggest challenges, but it's also one of the biggest opportunities, because if you can solve that challenge, then you've got an export ready product. Like I come back, and why I started the whole story with the space piece, because it really shows you just how highly respected Canadian technology is around the world for its ability for extreme precision, extreme ability to work in tough environments, remote control, or remote, like operation. Like we are our technologists have proven, like we've literally put other countries will stand on a Canadian produced robotic arm in outer space. So the belief is there. I'm not saying that the challenge of actually getting it there is easy, but we do have the best people in the world, some of the best people in the world working on this technology. So if you can crack that nut, and this is why you should keep going down that route, is that we, if you can solve it here, then you can solve it in anywhere. And this is where I think the market opportunity really lies, and also where the food strategy that's focused on domestic procurement is also really helpful because it tells us that there will be there's an increasing drive for support to develop those technologies further to the point that they can address those extreme margins. And so, but that is the challenge, that is the job to be done.
Jason, you have your hand up next.
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation, Hallie. Also, it was great. To piggyback off of Dan's comment and related to labor, you
Mm,
mentioned on one of the slides that robotics integrate or innovation or adoption can help towards increasing jobs or and that kind of thing within the sector. So that study must have been in like manufacturing and those kinds of sectors that have already adopted it quite a lot.
that's right. It would have been primarily there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So if like the data is showing that if someone adopts robotics, it's likely that they'll be able to grow and create more jobs. And it's hard to conceptualize how that might be the case in other industries. Is there more data to show that in other sectors outside of manufacturing? And maybe that can be a point of, hey, like we see this across sector with robotics. Um, it's hard for us to imagine that it'll happen, but
Mhm.
check it out.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been talking to some of the folks at StatsCan about the need to have robust Canadian data across sectors on adoption, on impact on employment, and all of this. Because if we're going to manage this transition, and it's happening anyway, like let's not forget, because if like Canadians worry, everybody worries about losing their jobs to AI and robots, but it's robots in other countries that are really the problem, not the ones here. And so it's really important to have granular data because you're right. The impact on jobs in manufacturing is going to be completely different in other fields. But let's also look at the situation in agriculture. We saw that the extreme need for labor and lack of labor in Canada for agriculture means Canadian farmers may not want to grow their labor force. So robots in farming are not necessarily, that might not be the need in agriculture to create more jobs. It might be that the need is to actually have fewer in order to maximize the ability of small farms to manage at scale. And so the need for labor in certain sectors is really quite different.
What do you
Okay,
think,
yeah, like
Jason?
one, like, oh, sorry, Joel, what was that?
You asked the question. Maybe introduce yourself and you've been at the cusp of that answer for the last what 3, 4, 5 years. So what do you think?
So yeah, so my background is in robotics and business, and I worked in the robotics research world for a little while. So looking at that ROI question,
Hmm.
what are the labor savings? And then a question that comes up too is like, where does the labor go?
Mm,
Mm. So and so I was working in that world, and now I'm taking a year to farm myself to get that firsthand experience and just the day-to-day challenge of it. So I guess one area that I think is that a lot of the labor requirements in agriculture, to Dan's point, is a lot of labor that's very repetitive and not necessarily
mhm.
a high skill ceiling to do. Let's say weeding as the low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
Um, and that it's such a it's a thing that's so critical that you could lose 70% of your crop, let's say, if you don't have a proper weed management strategy.
Yeah.
But you need people and you need time and you need effort to do that. So if you there's an opportunity there potentially to get rid of these low-hanging fruit or to help with the time constraint related to that so that more time could be dedicated to, let's say, processing on farm or adding value to a crop, getting more of the harvested crop getting the harvested crop closer to the point where it can be to the table, to that from that farm to table, within the country. Basically freeing up labor and adding jobs to be able to get the food to the table more quickly. So that could be processing the food, creating higher value products, or the hub investment opportunity that's there, from Canada as well. Um, yeah, so I guess that's kind of where my mind is with that. But that's the only thing I could really think of at the moment. I'm sure there's other opportunities and things we can't necessarily think of now.
Well, Matt's on the screen there, Matt. Why are you doing what you're doing? It looks like you're out in the apple orchard.
Yeah, I am. I'm leveraging the robots Starlink.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm doing it because we've seen over the last 50 years a huge shift from uh, basically we've more than tripled our grain crop production and we've cut our fresh fruit and vegetable production in half per person per capita. I don't think that's a bad news on grain. I think it's great that grain's gone up. It makes me sad that fresh fruit and produce has gone down. And the reason is because of the labor fraction. And so we got really, really good at growing tons of corn and soy with very little labor. And Haley's slides spoke to that. That's why those numbers are so high. And I think that's a good news story. I would like a similar good news story in fruit and veg. And so I think there's a lot of
Mhm.
things coming together, like what Jason was saying, where I think we hopefully have a future where we can grow delicious, abundant local fruit and veg with dramatically higher labor efficiency. Not infinite, like we need people in the rows and in the fields. But I get really excited about a world where we have much higher labor efficiency, and then that front of the grocery store is the cheapest part of the grocery store. So, Joe, that's
Mhm.
why I'm doing it because I don't see a way to get there if we don't figure out how to drive labor efficiency. We're specifically in orchards because it's a pretty defined problem. There are three things we do that consume almost all of our hand labor, and so we're working on robots to do one of those three for now, and hopefully all three. But Joe, that's the answer. I would like to see the huge. I would like to in 50 years look and see here's when row crop surged, and then here's when fresh fruit and vegetable also surged. Just 50 years later, and I think because enough pieces are coming together with robotics that is possible. So which I'm really excited about.
And Ryan, I thought, was on the call. Ryan, are you still there from Isionics?
I am still here. Thanks.
Oh, nice.
And
It's
it's
such a
same
unique
thing,
application area.
what's driving your business, I think is the same as Matt.
100%.
Productivity gains drive everything, right?
100%. The labor issue is the number one thing in mushroom harvesting. So we build robots that harvest mushrooms out of industrial mushroom farms. It's a labor problem. They have 20% labor vacancy rates. They can't pick all their crops. The turnover rate is high. It's a
It's not the
dirty,
funnest job in the world
terrible
either.
job. And so, sadly, it used to be only a sort of a temporary foreign worker program job, and that is challenging as well. And all over the world, it's tough to find labor. So yes, that's what's driving the adoption.
Well, and costs will come down as you sell your thousandth robot or your 10,000th robot too.
Yeah, I mean, not
So
not to go off track here, but I that's one of the questions that was brewing as we were having this conversation is, I'm on the sales and business development side, and so I think a lot about, a big challenge on the adoption front is just the payback period because the upfront capital cost is so significant. So of course we'd love to all deliver as a service model and amortize the cost for the buyer out over a long period of time, but small robotics companies don't have the working capital to do that. So how do you is there a way that we could, come up with a loan program that expedites adoption by, allowing the farmers to actually get some of the benefit of payback earlier, and double down on making their investments to scale up implementation. So it's something I'm thinking about. But yeah, it's a challenge. The other thing that's driving adoption, though, we talked about the labor cost replacement. I think the other interesting part of it is just the being able to digitize crops, digital twin everything, and do lots of really interesting algorithmic yield predictions, and really make the growing part of farming. I'm sure in apples, Matt, as well, but certainly in mushrooms, like it was literally farmers would walk into their warehouses and pick up compost and smell it and look at it and look at the crop that's coming and say, hey, we need to adjust the temperature or the CO2. And now you're like, no, no, we can study every crop for the last million cycles and forecast what the next million cycles look like and tell you exactly what the conditions need to be. And
Well, that's
so
where the
that
AI
that
kicks
is
in,
a
right?
robotics thing, but it's also just what's available with the software side of AI too.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah. Dan, you've had your hand up for a while there.
Yeah, maybe just to go quickly back to the question of the effect of robotics on labor rates in different industries. That was really interesting to see that in general, companies that adopt robotics actually increase their employment. And I can just relate from my experience. So I work at Vineland Research. We're a not-for-profit horticulture research institute. Um, and for the past 5 years or so, I've been talking to growers about automation. And anytime the question comes up, growers will always say that they will keep on their temporary foreign workers. Many of them have been working for them for decades. They'll keep them on and have them doing, work that's less strenuous and more dignified generally. So there's a huge appeal to, reduce the labor or just change the type of labor that workers are doing. So I just thought I'd put that in as a comment that, that I think the same will be true in agriculture as it is for other industries.
Thanks. And that is a comment I get a lot when I go to especially student events where they're just learning about different robotic applications. They're like, what about the current farm workers? What happens to them? So that's something that the general public, I think I've heard them ask about as well as they interact with people. Matt?
Yeah, and I've also heard that from almost all the growers we're working with, that if we're able to double labor efficiency, they're going to plant twice as many acres. That's the outcome, not same
Mhm.
acres, less people,
Yeah.
which would be great because that's going to surge fruit production. I also wanted to highlight just what Ryan said about there's certain things that the robots can do much better. And I think so. I think when we just think of the robots as a labor offset, that's not, I think we're missing something.
Mhm.
Because like, there's a lot of things where the Messianics robot can just robots are really good at some things. Humans are really good at some things. They're not the same things. And so I think we can't miss that, right? And because there's certain robotic applications where those unique benefits of robots are incredibly valuable. And so I think we got to be pick and choose where we put the robots because there's some real slam dunks. I think if we just think about robots as labor offset, I think we're really missing some phenomenal opportunities. And the last thing I wanted to say is just an anecdote. So like we're up in Thornbury now. It's been, low 40s humidex this week. The crews stopped work at 2 yesterday and the robots ran till end of day. So I think like in a world of climate change, we got to be really honest with it. Like this work has to get done. And it is not fun. So we were out here keeping an eye on it, but it's very different because I'm sitting in the shade of the tree, right? I'm not in the tree doing canopy work. If I was doing that, I also would have stopped it too, right? But let's not like I think when we talk about food security, the realities of working out in 44, 45, 46 humidex weather, again, another thing that a robot can do pretty well, but humans don't. And so let's not forget about that. Just an anecdote from literally yesterday.
A well-designed robot that can handle all environmental conditions, Matt.
Good point. Good point. Still working on it.
Not to be undervalued, underappreciated.
Perfect. And Matt, we'll get an update from you maybe in the next couple of weeks of how the research and how your work's going this summer as well. So I'll reach out to you over email for that. Any other questions or comments about.
Before we sign off today, Anne Michelle is leaving AAFC. She sent out a letter this week. We should maybe congratulate her on her change and thank her for all her good work over the years at Agriculture Canada. Are you still on, Anne Michelle?
Yeah, I see her. I think she's just on mute there. And Michelle and I had a great chat yesterday about her post-retirement plans as well, and how can she can still stay involved with this group as well. So yeah,
Thank you.
just congrats on a fabulous career and all the work that you've also added to this group here.
Yeah.
Thanks for your service. Yeah.
Oh,
Good
thank
work.
you, Joe. That's really appreciated. And thank you for all to be so bright and brilliant and innovators for the future. May I ask a question to everyone? We were talking about labor, replacing labor, but now your labor, your crew, the technicians that you are developing, is it easier to develop the technicians within each of your companies, or do you have network of colleges, or did you talk to universities to develop those people that are able to repair the robots? What solution seems to be the best? And actually, it's a
Those are, I
question.
think, we'll let somebody like Jason talk about it because he was right at that intersection. It's something that I worry about a lot because we're creating a new industry. We don't have those skills. We're
Yeah.
going to have to draw people in from outside of agriculture that are, University of Waterloo graduates and things like that, where they don't traditionally come into our sector. So, Ryan and Matt and Jason and Dan would probably have a good feel for that, but we don't have a feeding system or a farm system that's going to develop that talent. So we're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, as well, thinking as a little bit outside the box is to have remote repairs, right? To have like a,
We're going to
I
have
think,
to.
yeah, we'll have to. Anyway, just saying, just a question like that. Sorry, I'm disappearing in the background. Thank you again.
Matt, you have your hand up again?
I know we're at an end, but I just was gonna say, I feel like there's a bit of a cluster developing in Waterloo. Like, he works a lot with Ryan, Path and Auto, right? Sort of started it, but now got Upside and Swap Robotics and Onyx, right? So like, there's a cluster where we support each other and we share knowledge. Like I know my Sonics helped us with solving some issues that we had. So I think I would say that there is a bit of a nice cluster developing in KW of robotics companies that are in very different applications, but a number in ag. And we share a lot of knowledge, and we'll even share people. There is people from one robotic company coming and helping another robotics company on the build time. And so to the comment on like how do you train the tech, I think it's hard to beat where you start building a cluster because you get just a critical density of knowledge. So to answer the question.
Yeah, good point.
Right, thanks. And then before we cap off, I did drop 2 links for our demo days this summer. So if you haven't registered for the demo day in Simcoe, you can find the link in the agenda, also in the chat here. I also put the Innovation Farms Ontario demo day in the chat as well. Registration is open for that one as well. That'll be hosted at Haggerty Creek in Bothwell, Ontario. So please take a look at the agenda. There's some new events that we've added to it as well. Same with a couple new funding opportunities too, if you haven't seen those. Feel free to take a look. And then if you have any questions, reach out to myself, or if there's a specific content in the agenda, reach out to them directly as well. Other than that, we will reconvene next Friday, where Kaya Moore from Innovation Farms Ontario will share the research that they're doing on the farm this summer. And then she'll give us a peek of what's happening over there that you'll also see at the demo day in August. Other than that, everybody have a great weekend. And again, thank you to our guest speaker for sharing and for all the engagement. And congrats again to Anne Michelle on her retirement.